Most leaders do not have a strategy problem. They have an execution problem that they can't quite name. My guest today, Norman Wolfe, led the turnaround of a $1.2 billion operation at Hewlett-Packard and has spent decades helping CEOs and executive teams close the execution gap by aligning strategy, culture, and purpose in a totally different way. Norman is the founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders and the creator of the Living Organization, a framework that helps leaders stop treating companies like machines and start treating them as living, breathing systems built on energy, relationships, and belief. Look, if you've ever wondered why 60 to 70% of strategic initiatives never hit their targets and what you can actually do about it, this conversation will change how you think about leadership, performance, and growth, not just in your organizations, but in your personal life as well. Norman Wolfe, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Move the Chains podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad you invited me.
Well, I want to jump right in. I was joking with you before we hit record. I feel like I have so many questions that I'd love to get answers from you on. But let's start with the phrasing that you use, a machine versus a living system. Can you explain to us maybe give us some examples of what that looks like in an organizational setting, what the difference is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we've all considered and thought about how we lead and guide organizations to collectively produce outcomes is rooted in a sort of a mechanical, I call it machine-like approach. The leadership of the organization designs the machine. What I mean by that, not only does it lay out the strategy of what we want to achieve, but it also begins to define how the organization is organized, and how processes are going to flow. The mindset is one of thinking about how do I most effectively and efficiently take out inputs and efficiently produce outputs. Mm-hmm. And so the thinking about that is really mechanistic. We're going to organize it with a sales department, an operations department. We're going to have a sales and marketing. No, let's break up sales and marketing and specialize them. Let's break up marketing into social media and, et cetera, et cetera. And we just think of it as a machine to be structured and organized. In that model, there's a whole bunch of byproducts, negative byproducts from my point of view. One, people are considered additional components. That's really the way we view people in most parts. Not that we don't respect and appreciate that they are human beings, but in terms of producing outcomes, we think of them as how do we make them efficient, effective components so they get the job done. That's the mechanical or the machine paradigm view. I've taken a different view, and it's come from years of my own personal experience. It's come from working with leaders who have been very effective. There are 70% are failing, 30% are actually succeeding. So there are some success stories we can look at, a lot of them. And what I notice in both how I've learned to lead organizations effectively and from those who are also successful is they unconsciously have a different way of looking at it. They look at the organization as a person, and they ask the question, how do people create results? And it has to do with, we hear these terms all the time, engaging them, empowering them, make them part of the solution, not part of a problem I've got to manage. And so I've taken that framework, broken it down to what does it mean to really empower people? What does it mean to really engage them? How do we get them to feel like they are contributing to the success of the collective, and in doing so, their own personal success is achieved? That doesn't happen when you treat them like component parts. So Let me stop there. As you said, there's a lot we can talk about. I can go on for hours, so I'll try to be as concise as I can. But that is the I would say the contrast between the two paradigms, as I call them.
Okay. So I think that's a great place to kind of pause. I've got a few follow-ups for you here. I guess the first one would be, what is one painful symptom that leaders are living with or tolerating every day that is a result of that outdated machine paradigm?
That's a great question, because it raises the issue that I have always felt, and actually in many ways drove me to create this. Every leader I know has always voiced in one form or another the desire for their team and their people to take more of an ownership position in creating the results. Right? You hear it said in many different ways. Why can't they bring me a solution, not just a problem? Why can't they commit to these things? They say they're aligned, they say they agree, but they don't actually take a level of ownership to it. They don't commit to it. Other comments are, why does every problem come to my desk? I mean, there's various ways of saying it, but this notion of ownership is really at the root of most of the negative experiences. Components will never take ownership. Ownership is a matter of choice. If I come to you as an employee and said, you have to do this, I'm already setting up a negative byproduct. Telling you you have to is not empowering you. It's evaluating you. It's being in judgment over you. It's having power over you. But if I come to you and I say, Brian, here's what we're trying to achieve as an organization. You're really talented in this particular area. How do you feel you can make the most contribution? Now I'm giving you choice. Now, of course, the choice isn't unlimited, right? There's boundary conditions every organization has, whether it be the values we live by or the resources we have or the way the various people have to coordinate together. So there's always boundary conditions. Mm-hmm. Within those boundary conditions, how are you going to contribute? And that changes the dynamic, because now you're a choice. You're choosing to want to do this instead of feeling like you have to do this.
Mm. I love that. That's such a great way to just get people involved in making a decision. Like you said, because they have choice in how things are going to go forward, it gives them that ownership. It's such a beautiful way to approach it. So the second follow-up here, as you're talking through that mechanistic view of, I guess, what I'm hearing is an org chart. You didn't exactly use those words, but I'm curious, when you approach setting up an organization or a team like a living system, do you utilize a different structure for an org chart that facilitates more collaboration, less of this cog or component siloization, if you will?
Yes and no. And I guess this gets to one of the major differences between our approach and the more traditional approach. Organizations need structure, right? Structures help us coordinate. They help us understand, like I said, where the boundary conditions are, what my role could be, what your role is, so we know how to relate to each other and so forth. So I'm not opposed to structure. I'm not one that says, hey, we should give up, hierarchy, or we should go from, squares to circles and have self-organizing teams. I do believe in self-organized living beings, as collectives for me are an individual, but we'll get to that later, I assume. Getting back to your question, I do believe in structure, and I think it's very important. I believe in processes. I think they're important. But in the machine paradigm, structure and process dominate. In the living organization, they support. So that's one differentiation. And what they're supporting is what we call context. So, for example, you talk about collaboration. Collaboration in the mechanistic approach, because process and structure dominate, we end up unconsciously forcing and sustaining silo mentality. And it's simple, right? I'm VP of sales. My job is to manage the sales function. That's how I get supported. That's how I get rewarded. That's how I get promoted. That's my success factor. In that model, I know I have to work with marketing. I know I have to work with operations, but my model is I got to optimize my unit. Mm-hmm. In the living organization framework, we look at structure, but we look at it as not defining, but supportive. And we look at what's defining as the idea or the mindset that we are in an ecosystem. As an ecosystem, which makes sense if you're a living entity, right? Mm-hmm. My success is highly dependent on yours. So when we look at structure, we also look at what's underlying the dynamics of that structure and what is the nature and quality of the relationships that the structure is trying to support. So, if we're in an ecosystem, I need things from you for me to be successful. Mm-hmm. But I also know for you to be able to give me what I need, I often have to give you what you need. Right. So there's that interdependence nature, and we build that into the thinking process, and then the structure ends up supporting that, rather than trying to make the structure create the thinking process, which is the way the machine paradigm thinks of it. Structures do not create mindset or context.
Okay,
Humans don't operate that way.
So that I really like that. Let me make sure I heard that correctly. So basically, you're saying the thinking process dictates the structure rather than structure dictates thinking. What does that look like? Either I'm going to say on a Monday morning, but I think you know what I mean. Like in theory, I love that, but in reality, and your example is great. I see this all the time. You've got product team that's creating this innovation. You've got the marketing team that has to figure out how to speak to it and bring it to the world. You have the sales team who's responsible for getting the sales. They all have to work together. How do you, whether maybe it's in the go-to-market planning part of it, like where does the thinking become the lead domino in the implementation of this or application?
It's built into the recognition of the way we're going to view an organization in the first place. So if you maintain that machine paradigm, all the things you say lead me to, where I know marketing and operations and sales and product development all have to work together. But since they're siloed, what we're going to try to do is overlay that with a cross-functional team. Right? I mean, that's a kind of classic way of solving that problem. Right. We don't have that problem in the living organization framework because the foundational thinking of what an organization is a living person or a person. And when I talk about person, I think of a collective as a person, just to simplify it. So it's a person in relationship with other people. So I know going in that when I am in terms of product development, I know my other partners in this game are critical to my thinking. So I'm already thinking in terms of what can I do to help. So let me give you a concrete example. I have a client that I'm working with, and I've been helping them adopt this new mindset, you might call it, or new paradigm. Mm-hmm. And I was just meeting with the CFO, right? And I asked him what is his goals for 2026 and so forth. And I was happy to see that in his personal goals, he said, we have a strategic objective to make our branch operations shift from a operations perspective to a business perspective. In other words, the branch managers are now going to have new responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Without telling him, he said that his goals is to help facilitate that strategic by providing business level training to all of the branch managers and to provide them the tools to think like a businessman. right? And that's what we mean by an ecosystem. He knows he has a role to play. He knows that he doesn't have to be asked to set up a cross-functional team and make sure the branch managers and finance are getting together, right? The CEO isn't going to worry about that. In fact, the CEO loves the fact that he doesn't have to worry about that because his team is already thinking in that living organization ecosystem mentality. So that's what I mean by that. Now, once that thinking is in place, once that mindset is in place, then the natural question is, how do we support this interaction with structure? Reports, for example. What reports do they need?
Right.
But that comes out more organically. And one of the things we, maybe to give maybe a little framework to this difference, in the mechanical system, we pay most of our attention to the activity and the structure of the activity. In the living organization framework, we know that activity and relationships, which collectively we can call our behaviors, is driven by our context or our mindset or our thinking, our framework, whatever you want to call it. We use the term context. So context determines behaviors, and the behaviors determine results. In the machine paradigm, we want results, and we try to force behaviors through structure and rules and KPIs and incentives, but we never address the context that's actually driving the behaviors. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons it fails. So that might help explain what I'm trying to describe.
No, absolutely. And I think, that's one of the things that I find myself reminding leaders all the time is when you give a directive, for lack of a better word there, that you always have to attach the why we're doing this. And it's the context. That's what you're speaking to. And, it's even exactly better right. If you can weave in a little bit of the, how to win friends and influence people and tie it to something that they want. Right. You mentioned context a couple of times. I know that's one of the energies that you talk about. So yes. Maybe this is a good segue for you to get you to share, the three energies and, how those impact, the culture and the ability to execute for an organization.
When I began to formulate these ideas, when I began to, if you will, take apart how people, given that I was beginning to think of organizations as a person, how do people create results? So I kind of looked at myself as a laboratory, if you will, as well as others that I would interact with. And I began to just use the principle of energy because, we know that energy can't be created or destroyed. So whatever we're doing is in one way or another transforming energy from one form to another, from an idea to a product, right? Yeah. So I began to ask the question from that perspective, what energies might be involved? So I'm looking at my energy. So clearly, when I want to do something, I have the energy of activity. I have to do stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And that's still important. That doesn't go away. That's still the machine paradigm elements. We want to make it efficient, make it effective, streamline it, optimize it. I don't want to waste my energy, right? So still an important element. But then when I look again at my own experiences and that of organizations I've worked with, I know that my activity is significantly impacted by the quality of the interactions I'm having with others. In a simple, kind of silly example, I have a fight with my wife in the morning. I go to work. That energy of that disconnect, that feeling of we're not in sync is carrying inside of me. That energetic, those thoughts, those feelings, all of that. I walk into work, I'm a little low energy. And it's purely energy, right? So I began to formulate, well, there's relationship energy. And in business, we know that teams that kind of sync up, they're what we call high synergy, right? Their energy seems to be amplified. Teams in conflict, they tend to have a reverse effect on the energy of the collective. They spend more time arguing, fighting, and less activity, so less results. Those were the two major ones I started with. But then I began to ask the question, and this gets to your question, what is context? I began to ask the question, what makes me behave the way I do? Why do I get upset when my wife says X, Y, Z? Why do I get angry at my coworker when they do something and somehow in my mind I think it's stupid, and it's like, why are they doing this? Or why are they saying that to me? Or what causes me to have those reactions that lower my energy? What causes me to think some things are possible and I'm excited about doing it, and other things I resist. I don't even think it's possible. My boss comes to me and says, we should do this. And I go, nah, never going to happen. What causes me to behave that way? Where the guy next to me hears the same thing from the boss and he gets all excited. Why he responds one way and I another way? That led me to dive a lot deeper into the human psyche and why we react and behave this way, and did a whole bunch of research in human development, human psyche, human psychology, social group dynamics. And that's where I started to evolve this notion of context. It's the collective belief systems we evolve over the course of our lives. We can call them our values, our beliefs, our worldview. But it's the thing that makes me respond a certain way to an event that doesn't make you respond the same way. Right? What is that within me? You can call it my own internal operating system if you want, but something in me causes that behavior. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if my results is a function of my behavior and I want to change my results and I have to change my behavior to do that, I better understand what's driving me to behave the same way, the way I am. So that's on a very personal level. Well, it's easy to extrapolate that to an organization because organizations have what I call collective context. Context is really a set of stories and narratives we have that give meaning to our lives. And organizations have the same thing. And we observe that in what we call the culture, which is how we do things around here. And culture is actually the outgrowth of the context that we bring to the conversation or the situation. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, that's great. The thing you said right there at the end, that culture is the outgrowth of context within an organization, I think that's so profound, because when I think of groups or organizations that want to change culture, it's almost as if their actions are the equivalent of the medical world treating symptoms rather than root cause.
Oh, that's well said. That's very well said. That's exactly right. That's why I make the distinction between culture and context.
Yeah.
Culture is the result of, or the outgrowth of, the context we hold. And the context is really a set of internal narratives that, here's the way an experience happens to us. We tend to want to make meaning out of the experiences we have in life. Mm-hmm. So we know how to behave in response to them. Mm-hmm. So you can think of it as an experience happens. We create meaning, which really is a story about what this event means. Yep. And then we associate a behavior with it. Mm-hmm. You can look at that as a connected pair, right? Yep. Behavior, story, pattern. As I go through life, I collect a whole bunch of these. You can almost think of it as a psychic DNA, right? A psychic DNA helix of event, story, behavior, response to whatever event looks like the one I made up the story about. This makes me really efficient in life, right? Because I don't have to rethink it every time I have a new experience. Yep. I just know what to do because I've got this instruction set. Right. Problem is when that behavior isn't giving me the results I want, I've got to go in and do a psychic DNA edit splicing thing. I've got to re-narrative my life. I got to create a new story that supports my new desired outcomes. So if you, and that's one of the things we teach our leaders is we call it reframing context. How do you understand how context is built? How do you take an event that is producing a result you don't want, back it up into the behaviors and the context driving those behaviors, and then how do you reframe that context so that you now begin to support the behaviors you want? And then how do you build the scaffolding? This is where the structure and the processes and the incentives come into play. You want to have those always supporting in the context that you have.
Yeah. That's great.
And that's really how culture is created.
Right.
But very few people understand that kind of connection.
No, that's really, like I said, it's so profound, so valuable to start to think about it from context first. Speaking of context, you have argued in some of your work that execution fails not because of bad strategy, but because we ignore context and relationship, those two forms of the energy. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I mean, we talked a little bit about how you are teaching context. What does the application of relationship and context energy look like? Maybe it's best like to ask for a concrete story where you change that energy mix of relationship and context, and that fixed execution without necessarily changing strategy.
Yeah. So when we're working with clients, and I'll give you a couple of examples if we have enough time for two. And when we're working with clients, we start with what are the results you want to achieve. Right? So that's the strategy. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to unpack what the cause for the lack of strategy is. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the first place we start is always at the most simplest area to change, which is processes, right? Structure, activity. Because that's easy. You can just go in and retune the process and come up with a new bonus plan or something like that. And if that's what was getting in the way, and sometimes the structure does get in the way. I've got an old structure that was defined a long time ago, and it's actually constraining the creativity that allows us to do it, for example. Right? So just change the structure. But oftentimes, the problem isn't the structure, it's the underlying relationships between them. So I'll give you an example that took me through all three layers. I was working with a client. They were, on the surface, the problem was they were missing deadlines, not meeting their product release dates. Customers were getting upset. Salespeople were beginning to get upset. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing I did was review the process for how they went about establishing the deadlines and managing the product release cycle. I discovered very quickly they had a very good system in place and there was nothing wrong with it. So I went through, well, what's going on? Why isn't it fixed? And what I began to discover was there was conflict between the sales department and the product development department. And that was creating tension about setting priorities. And the dynamics of the relationship was increasing conflict and increasing distrust between the two parties. So, one would think that that's an easy one to solve, just get them together and sort through it. But as I began to do that, I discovered there was a deeper issue, and it was the context issue. And here's what it was. The organization was in the early days of internet, and this company had what did they call it? They helped clients optimize their advertising on Google and point to click. And they did it by having a very elegant tool, a software tool, algorithm that allowed them to optimize the pay-per-click allocations for their clients, so the clients would get the best. Right? Sure. The company's context, the way it was set up, was we're a sales company. We help sell advertising, right? Yeah. the product development, the head of product development believed that, yeah, that's what you were, but we should really be a platform, build this platform out and sell the platform to other companies that do what we always did, right? So he had a context, a purpose for existing that was very different than the sales department and even the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
But it was this difference in context was never brought to the surface.
Right.
When I did my activity relationship context SWOT analysis and presented it to them in this way, it was like, oh, of course. No wonder why we can't figure anything out. So there's a very concrete example of how when you're thinking about what's causing the inability to achieve our strategy, if you don't go to that level, you often miss what you call the root causes of it, right? That's what we're trying to find. So we can fix the problem that actually exists. In this situation, it turned out that there was a misalignment and the head of IT, the director of development, refused to shift. He thought that the CEO's strategy was fundamentally wrong, and he was undercutting it unconsciously by creating his own definition of what success in 3 years or 5 years looked like. He had to go.
No, I'm curious. Do you, I think activity is easy to measure, right? I'm curious, how do you, I don't want to say measure the context or the relationship energy, but there's got to be some mechanism to keep it front of mind otherwise it just becomes this thing that you have to remember to do. So how do you build it into the system, or the ecosystem, the environment? Like what does that look like?
Well, again, it goes back to first, you have to accept the fact that it's a person. And as a person, I've got to pay attention to not only what they do, but how they are relating internally and externally, and what is driving their core belief system that's making them respond automatically, if you will, or autonomously to the way they're responding. So the first thing you have to do is accept the fact that you're dealing with a different entity that's creating outcomes. It's not a machine, it's a person. And once I accept that, then I as a leader know I have to pay attention to these three things. Just like I as a parent, and I often use parenting metaphor because there's a lot of similarities. I as a parent know that when I'm raising my child to be more mature and to help them develop to be mature, successful adults, I have to pay attention to not only what they do, but why are they doing that? What are they thinking? How come they're behaving that way? How come they feel, this, that, or the other thing, right? And they go through stages, and I have to understand that. And as a parent, we may not be perfect, but we kind of know that's what we have to pay attention. So the first thing leaders have to do is know they have to pay attention to that. And one of the things we teach is the role of the leader shifts from plan, organize, lead, and control to setting context, developing people, building a sense of community, and being of service. Very different roles. So from the get-go, we set that up as a if you want to work with us, that's where we're going. And we don't expect you to flip a switch overnight. You've been trained and conditioned to think the way you have. We're going to help you through that and keep reminding you. So that's one of the things we do with our clients consistently. With that shift in mind, then it's the tendency to problem solve starts looking at the right parameters.
Yeah.
Right? And once you start doing that, then thinking about context becomes part of what you always think about. We also teach some skills around how to do that because context is not observable and measurable quite the same way as you pointed out as activities. It's more sensed and felt and intuitive. So we teach you how to be able to sense, feel, and intuit what's going on around you and what's going on in the interactions. And again, a lot of that is energy oriented, right? When you walk in and you see your wife and you kind of feel this energy that there's something going on, and you say to them, what's happening? Because you're concerned, and they respond, nothing, everything's fine. You still feel, and you trust that energetic feeling that you picked up, that something's off, right? So how do you read that in an organization? How do you read that in a group? How do you read that when you're talking with customers? We teach that skill as well, so you can measure context or measure relationship energy intuitively and through a felt sense. So yeah, we've also, there's relationship assessments such as EQ assessments. We've developed an assessment that we call maturity assessment, because maturity and context are highly correlated. Okay? And in many ways, maturity is the way we express context into the world. And there's aspects of maturity we can identify and begin to collect data on and measure. So.
Yep. You mentioned the EQ model. I have a colleague, he and I teach an emotional resilience program to first responders, and we use the EQI 2.0 model for that one. And just from doing what we do there, I know how important those soft skills are. And it's great that you've built that into what you do, and the leadership curriculum that you guys are bringing. If a listener did just one thing differently in the next month to lead with more of a living organization paradigm, where would you tell people to start?
This may sound a little airy-fairy and woo-woo, but the honest truth is I would suggest them learning how to, we call it, move from the head to the heart. Again, if you think about it from an energy point of view, and I'm not meaning this as, go meditate for hours on the mountaintop kind of thing. The mind is processing information from the perspective of what it already has organized and trying to fit things into that and make decisions accordingly. The body, and mostly I look at it through the heart, when we tune into the body and the heart and go into a different state of gathering information, if you will, we begin to sense these dynamics that are happening. And so learning to be heart-centered, as we call it, learning to listen from the heart, to communicate from the heart, changes the dynamics and gives us the information that often gets in the way. And let me make it concrete for you. I was talking with, again, another client just the other day, and he was talking with me about a problem he was having with one of his managers and wanted to know how to approach it. And he's already been trained in the skill of heart centering. And so I simply said to him, okay, here's what I want you to do. You've articulated the problem. You know what's going on. You know your struggles that you're having with it. I want you to drop into the heart center. Kind of knows how to do that. I said, now from that place, I want you to bring this person in front of you and visualize her. It happened to be a female. And what might be going on with her, step into her world and see if you can experience what's going on with her. And then come back and tell me how you would respond to that. He goes, wow, I see it. I got it. I know what to do. And he entered into, I followed up later, he entered into a completely different conversation with her, with, I'd just say, more empathy, and was able to engage her into her discovery of what her concern was, and they were able to find a mutual solution to it. Again, going back to this notion of respecting people for who they are, giving them choice on how they want to participate, and then finding the right combination where that fits. And if it doesn't, it becomes obvious it's not a good fit, and they leave on their own. You don't have to get into this whole firing thing. So there's an example.
Yeah.
So the one skill, learn the heart centering. It's foundational.
So we're having this conversation at, you want to look at, if we put your career on a timeline, you're where we are today. Was there a point early in your career, or like what was that point early on where you started to realize that the old paradigm was not what was going to get you or your companies or your organizations where they wanted to go? Like, how did all of this start to really change for you?
Well, as with many things in life, the early experiences sort of build over time to get me to that point. But it really happened very early in my life. Two events within probably 6 months of each other. I was a new engineer working at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. I was part of a computer group. Our job was to manage and run the applications, and I was also in charge of the systems programming for a test and data acquisition system. And there's a small group of us. I think we were about 5 people. I come into work one day and I hear my boss say to one of my coworkers, "Look, I know you're having troubles at home, but this is business. You know, when you come into that door, you leave your personal life at the door." And I think about that and I go, how would I do that? What part of me do I leave behind? So there was a big cognitive dissonance just in that statement.
Yeah.
Like I said, within 6 months of that, there were 3 of us who a very close team on the test station data acquisition support group, and we were relishing in how much we loved our jobs and how much fun it was and how creative we were being and how we helped the engineers in achieving their goals. And the same supervisor comes in and he overhears us for a few minutes and he says, "Work is not meant to be fun. If it was fun, you'd be paying us. What do you think this is, Disneyland?" And walks out. Okay, so that's my introduction to the world of business, right? But then throughout my career, I kept seeing the similar pattern happen over and over again, right? This notion that, hey, you're just a component part of this big machine. You come to work, you do your job, you get paid, you get your incentives. We're going to motivate you. We're going to stimulate you. But your job is to be a good component and leave your personal life at the door. You're not a human. You're just a machine part. And, we come in with new tools. The PC comes aboard. Jobs are replaced. Internet comes along. Jobs are replaced. Now AI, and everybody's talking about how we're going to replace jobs. But in the machine paradigm, what do you expect? My goal is efficiency. I've got a new tool, a new component. I can replace the old components. They can work 24/7. Robots can work 24/7. Okay. We always want to do that. But, we are human beings and we do want to improve ourselves. We do want to use tools. We naturally gravitate to tools. I'm using AI all the time now. It's making me more efficient, more effective at what I do. But it's not replacing me. It's enhancing me.
Right.
And so that's been the pattern of my life all along. And when I got to this notion of being really focusing on strategy execution and 70% fail, I began to remember those events. And that's what led me to think of a new paradigm.
You mentioned the pursuit of efficiency. And I know that you've talked at times where that can be a fool's errand to pursue efficiency at all costs and at all times. Can you give us an example of when and how choosing to not be efficient would actually be beneficial?
Sure. So let's go back to the notion of optimizing my unit. In this case, I am manufacturing vice president. And obviously my goals is to minimize inventory, make sure the manufacturing process is efficient. We're not wasting stuff. And those are my basic parameters. Inventory turns is an important one. Cost of goods sold is another one. And we as a company come along and we say, and this is actually an actual example, we are a second-tier company we cannot compete with the top tier companies on with advertising and brand awareness and so forth. But here's how we can go and get our products sold. Right? We want to invest in giving, in this case, it was a medical device situation. And the strategy was to recognizing that pharmacists have a big say in what they suggest to the consumer, right? The doctor will define a certain product, but the pharmacist can switch that with a generic brand or a different brand. You know, the various brands are really up to the pharmacist to choose. So the strategy was to sell to the pharmacists, give them availability, almost not flood them with product availability, but make it really easy. So the pharmacist doesn't worry about getting product. They have it on hand. They fulfill it with that. And that's the way this went. But look what happens. I, as a manufacturing rep, don't want a lot of product out there sitting on my inventory because that's affecting me, right? So I'm optimizing. I'm making myself efficient. I'm optimizing my unit, but in fact, sub-optimizing, in fact, killing the whole organization's success. Yeah. There's an example of efficiency outdoing the goals of the organization.
And I think you could even tie that back to previous parts of this conversation where somebody in that silo was unaware of the context and the goals of the larger organization, how their
That's right.
actions impact everyone else. Norman, I think we're hitting the end. I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll let you get to your next meeting. But before we go, where can our listeners get more of you? Whether it's the Living Organization book, following quantum leaders, what's the best place to get more of your insights and work?
Well, I appreciate that, Ryan. So the book is available at Amazon. The Living Organization, Transforming Business to Create Extraordinary Results. They can reach me through Quantum Leaders or directly at nwolfe@quantumleaders.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. And we are now, it just went to the printers and we'll be releasing sometime May or June timeframe, the second book of the Living Organization trilogy, which is Leading the Living Organization. So you can expect to see lots of promotion about that over the coming months, and that should be available in June. And that talks very much about the leadership skills that we had alluded to today. It's quite an interesting book in that it's a narrative, it's a parable about a CEO who's having these struggles, and a consultant comes and helps her. But it's kind of Lancioni style of telling a story in real life. So lots of examples, lots of reality built into it. And it's a fun read. You get to love the characters. So I hope people are interested in that. But those are the ways. nwolfe@quantumleaders.com is my direct email, and I'm happy to talk with anybody.
Well, we'll put links to all of that in the description, make it easy on people to grab those, with the exception of your email. We're going to make them at least listen and work to put that together. Norman,
that's a great idea.
we're going to protect you. We don't want bots to be, trolling that and flooding your inbox. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Thanks for the time today. And, we'll hopefully be in touch in the future. For everybody listening, thank you for being a part of the Move the Chains podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with somebody you know who will benefit from what we're talking about here today with Norman. And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for being here.